I developed chronic fatigue, unexplainable symptoms, unexplainable illnesses, and anxiety, and all the really bizarre stuff that so many people end up with and really have no answer for. And that was my reality. It started in 2000, and I really had no idea what was wrong with me. And it was just through a process, obviously, of searching and going, reading a lot of books, going to a lot of different doctors, and getting basically the same answer every time. It's all in your head. And as it turned out, I ended up having mercury poisoning, which unfortunately took me about 3 years to really figure out. And working with some different doctors, I had one, an endocrinologist, say to me, Dan, I think you have mercury poisoning. And first thing I said was, well, that's impossible because I tested for it. Well, what test did you do? I did a blood test. Well, only to find out wrong test. That would only be helpful if I was getting acutely mercury poisoned. So I'm sure Dr. Cutler will speak a little bit on that. But anyways, I said to him, well, what test should I do? He told me to do a challenge test. I did it, and sure enough, saw all this mercury that I didn't see the first time. And so my next question was, well, where do you think I got it from? And he said, did you have any dental work done around the time everything started? And I said, yeah, I don't know. So I ended up, looking into it. I was cycling at the time, and I recorded how I felt, when I felt bad, etc. And I had the dates, and I called it one of my best friends, who was my dentist at the time, because I remembered getting a gold filling put in, and he took out 2 amalgams. I still had about 6 or 8 in my mouth. So I looked at that date, or actually I didn't know that date. I looked at the date when I started feeling bad, and I called him, and he gave me those dates. And 2 days before the fatigue started is when I got those 2 amalgams drilled out incorrectly, vaporized a lot of mercury, overflowed my bucket. I became ill. That's tonight's subject. How did I meet Dr. Cutler, Andy Cutler? I started researching and reading everything I could on the subject. Matter of fact, anyone that wrote a book, anyone that spoke like they knew something, I called them or I read their stuff. Well, someone told me about Dr. Cutler's work, started reading it, read his amalgam illness book, read some people that said, yeah, absolutely, this guy's the real deal, does his homework. So I read literally everything Andy put out. And I called Andy and, spoke to him, said, okay, this makes sense to me. It makes sense from what I'm learning about these different chelating agents, different methods. And that's how we met. And he was gracious, and he gave me a lot of information. And I got well. And matter of fact, the man that's on the phone with you tonight was responsible for leading me in the right direction and me regaining my life and my health back. So, Andy, first thing I want to say is thank you, because there are so many when it comes to any type of heavy metal detox, chelation, everything, you name it about this subject. There is so much bad information out there. And you and I will agree on this, there's no doubt, that there right now to date, there is really only one method that really works. And I thank God that I was led in the correct direction. And now we teach that method, Andy, that you walked me through years ago. We teach that method at our seminar, and I am so excited. This will be the first time you've ever been at any of my seminars, and they will hear from the man that helped me. So this call means a lot to me, and I cannot wait to hear you speak at our seminar as well. But with that said, Andy, I've never even asked you this question before, so it's on my heart as well. How did you get into this subject?
Same way everybody else seems to. I got sick.
Yeah.
And, it's this problem with we all go to public schools and get taught the same stuff and don't get taught the same stuff. So everybody hears like the MDs know everything, and those of you who are lucky to be in another line of work do figure out that's not completely true. But the rest of us just keep heading down that blind alley until events confront us forcefully enough that we start to think. Realize I can't just go say, fix me, do what the guy says, and be okay. Got to actually take some responsibility to figure it out.
Right.
So that happened to me in the usual unmundane, very icky, essentially disabled with fatigue and allergies and so on story that all of you as clinicians will hear time and time again. And I had the bad luck to have that happen, the good luck that before that, by doing all kinds of geeky chemist and chemical engineer stuff, had learned the right kind of stuff that when the doctor started talking about how to chelate me, I realized this didn't make sense, couldn't be the right way.
Mm-hmm.
I could basically read standard medical textbooks and decide what had to be the right way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And more interestingly, and then did that and eventually got a lot better and talked about it and other people did it and got better and got a bunch of stories. And
you had a background, obviously. You had a background in some chemistry or...
Yeah, that's right. As I was chemical engineer, had done all kind of research stuff on kinetics. So when I was trying to puzzle out medical books to figure out what the hell was going on with me,
right,
the part I found easy was the kinetics of, like how you use drugs, how often you have to give them, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And when I brought that up with all the doctors about, why doesn't this make sense to you from like this chapter in Harrison's? And they say, well, we all decided that was too hard. It had equations. We would skip it. And the instructor got a big smile on his face and said, sure, we'll skip it.
Mm-hmm.
But apparently, even though I found the MD medicine textbooks really not to be that bad, they're very different than the practice. Apparently, they don't actually read them in school. They carry them around for exercise and do it all by apprenticeship and residency.
Yeah, you're right.
So, in a very fundamental sense, it's insanely frustrating to me. Everybody goes on about, this is my protocol, and I feel so strongly about it. I'm like, no, this is brain-dead stupid stuff that if you read any medical text, it says do it this way, and all I'm doing is doing what they said.
Right.
But nobody reads that. They all go think of this as art and put their artistic touch on their clinic's protocol without paying any attention to the fundamental scientific principles of pharmacology underlying what happens when you give people pills or shots.
Exactly.
Like it's an art, like engineering or architecture is an art. There's some fundamental scientific principles. That's the way things work. You got to account for it. If you want to build a attractive, fast car or a beautiful building, it has to like actually run, not flip over. The building has to not fall down. The same with chelation. Is there's some fundamental constraints you have to adhere to. They're not flexible. They're laws of nature. The other part's flexible. And that part was straightforward enough to me due to the oddities of my background when I happened to show up sick at the alternative doctor's clinic.
Right. Yeah, the thing that I've found in this subject, whether it's, heavy metals, and with tonight's talk leaning more towards Mercury, I found that either people ignore what you just said, they ignore the obvious science as far as how to use certain agents or methods, and they just kind of do their own thing and make up their own rules, or they just, like you said, they just have, this opinion that, this method or this herb or whatever they're using works, and there's really no scientific, backing really behind it. So it's like one or the other, where they ignore the literature or they make up their own and they really don't have anything to cite.
Or they read it very selectively and pay attention to, there's enough things in literature you can find a paper that supports anything you want to say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for years, I've had the battle, the Chlorella, for example,
yep.
Is something, as the metal magnet, get on this thing, in 3 months, you're going to be fine.
Yes, that's a great lesson in real chemistry, is why is Chlorella special? Why does Chlorella absorb heavy metals from the environment, which it does?
Right.
Well, the reason is that it's alive, and it absorbs heavy metals from the environment like all living things do, because the difference between living things and dead things, or inorganic things like rocks, is living things are in a chemical state of reduction that have thiol groups. The environment's more oxidized. It doesn't have thiol groups. All living things absorb heavy metals from the environment. That's why all living things are susceptible to heavy metal poisoning, because we concentrate heavy metals from the environment. So to say you can detox with Chlorella is really not any different than saying you can detox with ice cream or pork chops. Nice. And in fact, if you wrote orders for somebody to eat ice cream 6 times a day, you'd be a lot more popular than if you told them to eat pills.
Right.
But somebody fixated on chlorella because they don't even know the chemistry of life. They don't understand what the chemical difference between living things and non-living things is.
Right.
This is not a special property of chlorella at all. Though you do have some real issues with the chlorella is grown in the environment and absorbs heavy metals from the environment. This kind of suggests maybe it's not a great thing to take because every once in a while you get a toxic batch.
Right.
And in fact, I have seen that clinically several times with the batches. The products they say are lot analyzed and guaranteed pure. Well, I guess they didn't analyze what came in the one capsule that they scraped off one part of a rock that had a lot of arsenic or bismuth or something.
Yeah, so what you're saying is when the chlorella is in its live form, obviously it can attract heavy metals from the environment. But however, when we
you don't want to take it then.
Right. Yeah.
Well, when you kill it, it will still absorb heavy metals, but it won't do that any more effectively than you or ice cream or a pork chop. Because
so that basically you'd have to take buckets of it. I mean, for it to be effective. Yeah.
Yeah. You'd have to take amounts of it where you would just become toxic from the cysteine content.
Yeah. Well, I think even I wrote in somewhere where in something that I wrote where I said, all right, well, at least chlorella will do a decent job in the gut. And then David Quigg from Doctor's Data, they started doing some tests on it, and he said, Dan, I don't even think that it really does a good job binding it in the gut. And he really made the same argument you made.
Yeah, because all the food you eat is full of thiols, just like the chlorella.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So a lot of good marketing, just typical.